today I'm going to do my family history again, the House of Crawford, Part 3, William Wallace. Alright, this is going to be a good one, y'all. Stay tuned. William Wallace and his Crawford relations. William Wallace is Scotland's most beloved son. He initiated the Wars of Independence against England, which, though not able to finish them, that being left to Robert the Bruce, provided the impetus that led to Scotland throwing off the English yoke, a circumstance that would persist until the Scottish King James VI, the first of England, assumed the English throne. At that time, the crowns of the two countries became permanently united. This article is based primarily on Blind Harry's work, known today as the Wallace. It is constructed from extracts of Harry and derives from how Wallace's life has been understood from folklore. Many historians contest aspects of this commonly held version. Blind Harry's The Wallace is an epic poem largely based on local stories that had sprung up around the figure of the hero and recorded in the 14th and 15th centuries. We truly do not know the validity of several of the facts and incidents, and we may never know. Several historians are researching the sources of the story more thoroughly and looking closely at contemporary records, but this is an ongoing and incomplete work at present. Therefore, the issue of validity is not addressed here in this article, but must await a future publication. However, Margaret Crawford is well established as the mother of William Wallace. We can also confidently include what is historically known of the role of his maternal relatives in the Wars for Independence. Though some of the details are challenged, including the final sequence of Crawford Sheriffs of Ayr, and of the actual events of a massacre of Ayrshire nobles and landholders at the Barns of Ayr in 1297 AD. Now, that was depicted in the movie Braveheart, where the English burned the Scottish nobles in a barn, but that has never been proved. Okay. On the other hand, Harry's story of Wallace's fishing the River Irvine is improbably consistent, described as where Wallace and his mother were living with his uncle Ronald Crawford. Loudon Castle was then a holding of the Sheriff of Ayr, Ronald Crawford. This story is uncannily consistent because knowledge that Ronald Crawford held Loudon Castle was completely obscure when Harry put the story to paper, since possession of the castle passed to the Campbells about 1315. Given Harry's circumstances as court minstrel and possibly a military past, with a possible military past, it is highly doubtful that he used obscure property records to confirm the accuracy of his ballads. William Wallace has come down in history as the hammer of the English. King Edward I of England was known as the Hammer of the Scots. After interminable skirmishes with English soldiers occupying Scotland, he commanded the Scottish troops along with Andrew Moray in 1297 at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Following this unexpected but resounding victory against the English, Wallace was knighted and named Guardian of Scotland. The 700th anniversary of the Battle of Stirling Bridge was celebrated in 1997 with many commemorations of Wallace's name and legacy in Scotland, as well as abroad, wherever dedicated Scots live. The earliest surviving comprehensive portrayal of William Wallace's life is the epic poem by Blind Harry, known today simply as the Wallace. Blind Harry lived and wrote in the last half of the 1400s, about 150 years after Wallace's death. He wrote down many of the popular stories about Wallace's life and legend, performing at the court of James VI to great appreciation. The poem was written down in about 1477. It was one of the first books published in Scotland around 1508 under the title The Acts and Deeds of the Illustrious and Valiant Champion Sir William Wallace. Current historians tend to challenge the veracity of much of this epic, but the work continues to provide the framework for William Wallace's life and draws its credibility as the narrative closest to the time that William Wallace actually lived, about 1270 to 1305. An adaptation by William Hamilton of Gilbertfield was published in 1722 as the life and heroic actions of the renowned Sir William Wallace, General and Governor of Scotland. Hamilton's version of the poem has been widely circulated over the last several hundred years, as popular in Scottish homes as the Bible. This work is also the source of most of what is known of Wallace's Crawford connections. Wallace's mother, Margaret Crawford, and his uncle Reginald, or Reynold, as Blind Harry writes, Crawford, 4th Sheriff of Ayr and Lord of Loudon, appear prominently. Where there is a deficit of information on the Wallaces, the Crawford family relations are well documented, mainly in genealogical chronicles, Crawford, Robertson, Patterson, Anderson, Burke, and local histories. Mel Gibson's film Braveheart in 1995 brought William Wallace's international recognition. Widely criticized by historians, the movie followed Randall Wallace's novelized version of William Wallace's life. Though some scenes did borrow from Blind Harry's epic poem, the movie does not give any acknowledgement or even mention of the extended family that prominently encompassed his Crawford kin. This is singular since the legends about William Wallace give his mother an intimate position. Stories suggest he was close to her and that Margaret Crawford was a significant presence throughout her son's life. He kept a missal, Missal, with him that she had given him as a child, possibly being the one he is described as reading from on the execution block in London. Now, we all know that Braveheart was fictionalized. It wasn't accurate. Some of it could be accurate, but most of it wasn't. It's Hollywood, you know. But anyway, who actually was William Wallace? He is certainly Scotland's best-loved hero, a national leader and fighter, both a general and a guerrilla, a man bigger than life as pertains to physical as well as spirit and legend. Wallace is described in the Scotty Chronicon, Scotichronicon, okay, written in the 1400s, as a tall man with the body of a giant, cheerful in appearance with agreeable features, broad-shouldered and big-boned, with belly in proportion and lengthy flanks. Pleasing in appearance, but with a wild look. Broad in the hips, with strong arms and legs, a most spirited fighting man, with all his limbs very strong and firm. Wallace is the man who, with very limited resources, routed the English, that centuries-long enemy of Scotland. The Scots, both psychologically and symbolically, identified themselves as the rival younger brother who was able to defend himself against the bullish elder sibling, England, Edward I. Wallace was and is all of these things. At the same time, William Wallace was a son of Ayrshire, known and loved by his extended family of Wallaces, Crawfords, and other related families who formed a relatively close-knit community around the towns of Ayr and Kilmarnock, and the surrounding countryside and villages. Blind Harry's epic poem names Malcolm as the father of William. However, there is evidence that this was not his name, or at least only name. Wallace, on becoming guardian of Scotland, sent a letter to Lubeck, Germany, after the victory at Stirling Bridge for the purpose of reopening Scottish trade with the Hasidic League. It sheds light on the topic. A transcription of the seal on the letter in Latin describes William, son of Alan Wallace. In 1911, metal casts were made of the front and back of the Wallace seal that was attached to the letter to guarantee authenticity. In January 1999, the casts were found hidden away in a small green box in Glasgow's Mitchell Library. Of interest is also the fact that the seal has prominent representation of a longbow, suggesting Wallace was an archer. What seems evident is that Wallace's early weapon of choice was the longbow rather than the sword. William's father is usually described as a minor landowner in the service of the Stewards, spelled Stewards. Stewart, that's how stewards were spelled back then, and then they changed their spelling to S-T-U with the U, okay, as in Mary Stuart and that. Their ancestors are depicted as having come to Scotland from Wales, thus the source of the surname Wallace, spelled W-A-L-E-S-I-S. Harry refers to the death of William's father, Malcolm, in a skirmish at Loudon Hill in 1291, providing a reason for William to return to Loudon Hill to avenge the death at the hands of the English. However, the Ragman Roll of 1296 lists an Alan Wallace as a landowner in Ayrshire. He is not named as a knight. Likewise, it says he is a royal tenant, not a tenant of the Stuarts, which the Wallaces of Rickcarron clearly were. If this Alan was William's father, then a dilemma presents itself. If William's father did sign the Ragman Roll, it would constitute fealty to the English king. The Ragman Roll is a collection of documents whereby the nobility and gentry of Scotland declared their allegiance to Edward I. It likewise weakens William's defense at his trial when he claimed that he had never sworn fealty to Edward. As his father's son, he would have taken on the loyalties of his father. However, he declared in his defense at his trial in London that he had never sworn such fealty. Thus, his fight against the English could not be considered treason. On his maternal side, William was the grandson of the Sheriff of Ayr, one of the very prominent landowners in Ayrshire. William's mother was Margaret Crawford, a daughter of Hugh Crawford, head of the House of Crawford, the third Sheriff of Ayrshire, and was Lord of Loudon and Crosby. Scenes in Blind Harry's epic poem describe Wallace's parentage. The Malcolm on the list line is the elder brother of William, Sir William Wallace, much renowned in war, whose bold progenitors have long time stood, of honorable and true Scottish blood, and in the rank of ancient barons go, old knights of Craigie, baronets also, which gallant race, to make my story brief, Sir Thomas Wallace represents as chief. So much for the brave Wallace's father's side. Nor will I here his mother's kindred hide. She was a lady most complete and bright, the daughter of that honorable knight, Sir Reynold Crawford, High Sheriff of Ayr, who fondly doted on his charming fair. Soon wedded was the lovely blooming she to Malcolm Wallace, then of Ellerslie, which amorous pair, transported with delight, beget young Malcolm that same joyful night. Okay. Sir Reginald Crawford was William Wallace's maternal uncle. William may have had a second maternal uncle whose name is not known, and who is considered by the historian George Crawford in his 1710 History of the Crawfords as the progenitor of the Crawfords of Braidland, and subsequently of the Ardmillan Cadet. A parental uncle, Richard Wallace, also figures in Blind Harry, but is considered by some current scholars as a later figure from a different line. He is mentioned as the landholder of Rick Carleton, with whom William seeks refuge while on the run. 3 Wallaces are listed on the Ragman's roll for Ayr, none for Renfrewshire. They are Adam, Allen, and Nichol. Since all landholders were required to sign the oath of allegiance, if Allen was William Wallace's father, his uncles' names were quite likely to have been Adam and maybe Nicole. Though we have no separate reference to Nicole as a relation. Men of the church would have not been listed unless they also held property. So the above does not clarify the identity of uncles who were clerics. William Wallace had 2 brothers, Malcolm the elder and John the younger, and a sister whose name has not come down. She is reported to have married into the Baileys of Lamington, a genealogy accepted during the 19th century, which today is acknowledged as having several discrepancies. Gives William as descending through his father from grandfather Adam, great-grandfather Henry, and great-great-grandfather Richard, who is described as having come from Wales in the reign of Stuart. And Uncle Adam of Rick Carleton is listed. However, some historians consider that there is no familiar relationship between the Wallaces of Rick Carleton and William Wallace's family. In the Loudon papers, a maternal uncle is claimed to have been responsible for William's primary education. Other sources say his primary educator was a parental uncle. A younger brother of his father is reported as being a cleric of the chapel of Cambuskenneth Abbey. Others have said Dunipace. Some confusion exists regarding this figure, since the familiar educator is sometimes identified as Sir Reginald Crawford, already mentioned above. Sometimes another maternal uncle, a granduncle also named Reginald, brother of his grandfather Hugh, who is known to have been a priest at Kerse. Blind Harry reports William as having been born at Ellerslie, Ellerslie, Ayrshire. Though disputed with an Elderslie in Renfrewshire near Glasgow. The first location is more likely since it is close to the known residence of his maternal Crawford relatives, Loudon and Crosby. It is also near Rick Carleton. Wallace lands near Kilmarnock. The above information from the Ragman Rolls would tend to support this. It is thought that Wallace spent considerable time at his maternal uncle Sir Reginald's residences, Crosby and Loudon, especially after the death of his father, who was supposedly killed when William was about 12. Sir Reginald is reported to, wait a minute. Okay. A sword claimed to have belonged to William Wallace hung above the staircase at Loudon for centuries. It is contended that upon Wallace's death, a Boyd of Kilmarnock returned it to his mother, though this conflicts with the commonly held belief that she died several years before William. The sword came into the Campbells' possession when the Crawford heiress of Loudon married into that family. It is 4 inches, and double-edged. Okay, 4 feet 4 inches, double-edged. I think that's what that means. This sword was sold at auction in 1930, and its current whereabouts are undisclosed. A different sword has been held at Stirling Castle for some 700 years. It is a broadsword weighing 6 pounds and is 5 4 tall. Okay. This sword is now located in the Wallace Monument near Stirling. Parts of this sword were identified as having been made at least 160 years later. Some claim that the second sword may have belonged to William Wallace's uncle, Sir Reginald Crawford. This sword was refurbished by order of James VI. Crawford C. Loudon tells of having looked at papers in the Loudon collection at Dumfries House in Ayrshire, containing information about the marriage of Lady Margaret D. Lambius Crawford of Loudon Castle to Malcolm Wallace of Ellerslie. In the ancient parish of Kilmarnock, Loudon Castle was located about 900 meters east of Loudon Castle. The site is next to the moat, whether existing at that time as part of Loudon or being part of the fortifications of a new castle of Loudon is unclear. Loudon may have been the place where William grew up, though he was reputed by Patterson to have lived at Crosby Tower, known as Crosby in Blind Harry. An estate a mile from West Kilbride, granted to his grandfather Hugh Crawford by King Alexander III for his role in defeating the Norse Vikings at Largus in 1263. In any case, Sir Reginald possessed both Loudon and Crosby at that time. Blind Harry describes Margaret Crawford fleeing to Dunfermline as a pilgrim when remaining in Ayrshire became too perilous. She died and was buried there. She must have been a formidable woman, tall, stately in carriage, and strong in faith. A commemorative plaque dedicated to Margaret Crawford is to be found on the grounds near the abbey under a thorn tree. Traditions surrounding Dunfermline tell that Sir William wanted to erect a monument to his mother after her death, but did not have time to do so. Thus he planted a thorn tree instead. The Dunfermline Abbey Kirk Session burial records burials by marking them from that thorn tree, a singular honor. The thorn tree stands on a small mound on the northern side of the kirkyard. During 1303, William Wallace hid in the forest of Dunfermline. It was then an impregnable woods surrounding the abbey on several sides. There are various spots that bear names like St. Margaret's Cave and Wallace Well, which commemorate places that have been provided shelter to Wallace and his men, as they alternately fought and hid from Edward Longshanks' soldiers. In 1304, Edward I occupied Dunfermline Abbey. He burned it when he left. It was generally thought that Margaret was buried there shortly before his arrival. That may have been the reason she was buried outside, providing an anonymous grave safe from a rageful revenge, which would likely have ensured had she had been buried in the consecrated area inside the church, as would have been expected in more peaceful times. Today, a 4-paneled stained glass window honoring Wallace, Bruce, Malcolm, Canmore, and Queen Margaret is to be found at the rear of the cathedral. Robert the Bruce lies buried inside that church, as is Queen Margaret. Dunfermline Abbey is thus a national monument consecrated to Scotland's most notable leaders. It was built by King David as a memorial to his mother, Queen Margaret, later canonized. Many passages of Blind Harry center on Wallace's mother and her family. One passage describes the loss of Margaret Crawford's husband and elder son Malcolm, her despair, sorrow, and the caring support and protection of Sir Reginald, her brother. Sir Reginald's response when finding out that Wallace had survived a confrontation with English soldiers while fishing at the nearby Irvine River is how a loving uncle would respond. The news did so surprise the ancient knight. He almost fainted in his nephew's sight. Then Bids kept the secret. Such fishing sport, if it be known, you might pay dearly for it. Uncle, said Wallace to the good old man, I'll push my fortune now where best I can. Since I no longer may with you abide, I'll try these English geldings, how they ride. A purse of gold the knight unto him gave. Wallace kneeled down and humbly took his leave. When that is done, pray, nephew, send for more. It was the killings in 1297 at the Barns of Ayr, Blind Harry's book says, which that is not been confirmed. but he says that may have set in motion the wars of independence, though some recent historians have questioned it happening. According to Blind Harry, William's uncle, Sir Reginald, was the first Ayrshire nobleman who answered the call of the English for a peace conference. He was hanged at the Barns of Ayr upon entering, as were 17, some sources say 117, another 360 other noblemen as they each arrived. This event was to be known thereafter the Black Parliament. William had been en route with Sir Reginald when asked by him to go to Crosby to retrieve papers pertinent to the conference. On his return, Wallace received warning from a Crawford woman, other sources simply say a friend, and was able to provide the trap. The rage he retaliated, burning the Barns of Ayr with the English soldiers barricaded inside. The killing of his uncle and the other Ayrshire noblemen is what may have propelled Wallace into organizing the resistance to the English. William's second in command was John Graham. His third in command was a maternal cousin, William Crawford. Upon John Graham's death at Falkirk in 1298, William Crawford became his second, accompanying him on the trip to the continent where they met Balliol and fought for the French King Philip. He also met with the Pope, requesting and obtaining the Pope's acknowledgement for the Scottish cause of independence. There is an incident described upon their return to Scotland of a narrow escape from English soldiers at the Elcho Park, or Elcho, home of William Crawford and his wife. The travelers had taken refuge there after their landing near Perth. Elcho Farm is located somewhat southeast of Perth. At one point, William Crawford went into town for supplies. English soldiers followed him back. When the English soldiers approached the house, the two Williams and their men fled into nearby woods. William Crawford's wife remained behind, and Cam came close to being burned alive. William returned, appearing suddenly, and managed to draw off the English soldiers, leading them into the forest where his party ambushed them. His second wife was thus rescued from burning. William Wallace was betrayed to the English and captured at Roybroyston near Glasgow. His informer was Sir John Meneth, a knight bought off by King Edward. Sir William was taken to London and executed on August 23, 1305. His manner of death, though for the time not unknown for treason, was horrible. Hanging followed by drawing and quartering. Some say that after Wallace's execution, the parts of his body were collected by John Blair, William's confessor, biographer, work now lost though some of us think that a copy might be held in the papal archives. A friend who became a monk at Dunfermline, it has been said that Blair buried Wallace's remains next to Margaret Crawford at Dunfermline. The flight of the English took a severe toll on the Wallaces and Crawfords. The English killed William's father and both brothers. Many of his maternal Crawford uncles and cousins likewise lost their lives. The heritable position of Sheriff of Ayrshire and the title and lands of Loudon passed to the Campbells when all the Crawford males of that line lost their lives to the cause of independence. This came about through the marriage of the heiress Susanna Crawford. daughter of Reginald, reportedly the fifth sheriff of Ayrshire, to Duncan Campbell. Okay. Now, having to keep peace between the dog and cat here, so excuse me. The fifth sheriff's brother Hugh survived, and it is on him and his descendants that the seniority of the Crawfords devolved. For his valor at Bannockburn, Hugh was rewarded by Robert the Bruce with a grant of the estate of Auchanames near Johnstone, which became the residence of the Crawford senior line and gave its name to that cadet. The Butte or Bannanty Mazer commission in 1319, currently on display in the Scottish National Museum, commemorates the contribution of Auchanames Crawfords, along with 5 other noble families, to the Battle of Bannockburn. The cause of independence was archived by 1314. The Mazer was a commemoration of the fulfillment of Wallace's cause that was continued by his Crawford cousins and others in his stead. The principal legacy of William Wallace for us Crawfords is his kinship to our house. His mother was a Crawford, and thus Wallaces and Crawfords acknowledge each other as kin. We also, through the centuries, have shared with Wallace his love of liberty, learned from bitter life lessons, and his uncle's need. Sir Reginald is said to have inspired his, at the time, very young nephew William with the statement, "I tell you true, freedom is best of all things to be won. Never live under the bonds of slavery, my son." As the leader of his country and the Scottish people, William Wallace is said to have often repeated this phrase to inspire them in their resistance to the English. William Wallace is one of Scotland's greatest heroes, a man of integrity, but also a man of his day, fierce and vengeful. His determination to free his country from a foreign yoke has provided a monumental legacy and essentially transformed the human perspective on government from one based on feudal rights to a government of the people. This legacy is manifest in philosophy, traditions, and practices to be found around the world. It is prominent in historical documents related to the struggle for independence, among them the Scottish Declaration of Arbroath, 1320, and the later American Declaration of Independence, 1776. Many of the signers of both documents were sons and descendants of those earlier revolutionaries of the Scottish Wars of Independence. We would like to finalize this article with a quote from the Declaration of Arbroath. It cogently expresses the elemental human dream of freedom, which is the basic premise of democracy, that people be allowed to be governed through their own choices. This is truly William Wallace's legacy. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone, which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. Hope y'all enjoyed. I sure did. And see you back soon.